Hey everybody, Happy New Year. This video will be coming out around the new year, and as in tradition in our household, every new year we review a piece of X-Files related media that is pretty popular, kind of diverting away from the purpose of this channel, which is kind of bringing a spotlight to underrated X-Files episodes. So we're going to cheat a little bit today, and we're going to talk about a very overrated X-Files episode, and for good reason. We are going to talk about this season 3 episode, Pusher. If you know a little bit about the fandom or X-Files fans, you will usually find this episode in like their top 10 favorite episodes, and for good fucking reason. Vince Gilligan wrote this episode. He is of Breaking Bad fame. He is the creator and director of that television show, which is probably one of the greatest television shows of all time. And I thought today, instead of going like beat by beat about the episode, since this is a very popular episode and I think most people in the fandom are familiar with it, if you are not familiar with it, drop everything and watch this episode. It's incredible. But I thought we would just talk about my top 10 favorite moments in this episode, because there's a lot of them. I thought that'd be kind of a fun, kind of a different thing to do on this channel. So these are my top 10 favorite moments from the episode Pusher. These aren't in necessarily the order in which I love them the most, but I do love them. So let's get right on it, okay? Number 10 is the atmosphere of this episode. I came across a discussion on Twitter, I think a few weeks ago, and they were saying like how the X-Files revival tried to capture that aesthetic and atmosphere of the 90s original series, and they couldn't do it. Instead of trying to adapt the characters and the story to a setting in the 2010s. And that was one of the reasons, one of the many reasons the X-Files revival failed. But I think it's almost like that aesthetic, that 90s aesthetic, is almost like another major character in the X-Files. And the episode Pusher is that distilled. I can't quite put it into words just how this episode makes me feel as a child of the 90s. Probably the best example is the opening, is the cold open, where Robert Patrick Modell, the villain, is shopping in Mount Foodmore supermarket. Love that name. There's some other really cute details in this episode, which we'll get to. There's also a golf shop and pro range called Teetotalers range and pro shop, which I love. I always get a giggle out of that. But the grocery store in the opening, the first shot is on these cabbages, and I always make this joke and I say, never have cabbages seemed more threatening. The sequence in the opening with the supermarket, it just encapsulates this feeling of warm nostalgia and impending dread and doom. It's kind of like those liminal space compilations you see on YouTube or on TikTok. It gives me that feeling of comfort and nostalgia, but also dread. I can't quite put it into words. I also noticed this. I didn't notice this on my previous, 70 watches of Pusher. I think I've watched it 70 times. That as the camera follows Robert Patrick Modell along the grocery store aisles, you're at a child's level. So that's another thing that just really drives it home. Just this kind of 90s aesthetic, especially if you're a child of the 90s. Maybe if you're not a child of the 90s, you don't feel that way, but that's how I feel about the aesthetic and atmosphere in this episode. It's spot on. So let's move on to number 9, and that's the throwbacks in this episode. I think Pusher's the first X-Files episode, and correct me if I'm wrong, that really delves into being meta and to having these throwbacks to previous episodes, kind of grinning and winking at the audience. This episode came out in 1996, so the X-Files had amassed a really big fan base at this point. It was no longer a cult television show, and I think they kind of took advantage of that and kind of winked at the audience. They were like, hey, remember this episode? Remember when this happened? They also play with a lot of tropes that have been built up in the series so far. We'll get to one particular one. It's my very favorite one in the entire series, and they do it in this episode, and they do it very well. There's a lot of throwbacks in this episode to like tropes and like breaking the fourth wall, but the one that always stands out to me is in the cold open in the grocery store, and Robert Patrick Modell like picks up a tabloid, and you see characters and creatures from previous episodes in the tabloid. The Fluke Man's on the cover. One of his babies got washed up on the shores of Martha's Vineyard, which is Mulder's hometown, which is pretty wild. Glad to see the Fluke Mans living his or their best life, having lots of little parasitic worm babies. There's also Sophie the gorilla from the episode Fearful Symmetry. Someone on Twitter pointed that out to me. Thanks. I don't remember your name, sorry, but thank you for that, pointing that out to me. Sophie the gorilla, who was an alien abductee in the episode Fearful Symmetry. I can't wait to review that wild-ass episode. And then there's a little like text box in the corner of the tabloid, and it says, "Debauchery rampant on hit TV show." And every time I see that, I'm like, yeah, we know. That's obviously like a very sly nod to the extreme sexual tension between the X-Files two co-stars, David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson. And that's all I'm going to say about that, okay? So next, let's move on to number 8, and that is the parallels in this episode between the villain, Robert Patrick Modell, and, of course, Agent Fox Mulder. This is probably the reason I like the episode the most. The second reason, I put it down on the list because I have a lot more to talk about that I love so much more about this episode, but the parallels are drawn almost immediately between Mulder and Robert Patrick Modell. From him picking up the tabloid and kind of like looking at it and giving it a little chuckle, but he's also like intrigued by it. He's very accepting of like supernatural circumstances like Mulder, but it's also, the parallels are drawn pointing out the problematic behaviors in Mulder. Like when Robert Patrick Modell is standing in line at the grocery store, he pulls the lapel down on an FBI agent and it says FBI, and he does it just purely for dramatic effect because, like Mulder, he is an edgelord. He's also a giant weeaboo, a Caucasian male obsessed with Japanese culture, like Mulder. And that's all fun and good, but like I said, Vince Gilligan very cleverly points out the toxic and problematic behaviors in Mulder and how they parallel this actual serial killer. This is pointed out in the series many times about like how Mulder can catch these killers because he kind of is a sociopath himself. Like with Modell, they're talking about him and they're like, he sees people as objects. Or like he was always such a little man and he wanted to do something big. They say he's extremely suspicious of authority, but he wants to be an authority. And I'm like, bro, that's Mulder. Like, Mulder's suspicious of the government, but he kind of starts a cult where he manipulates and gaslights people. And then Mulder, like, viewing people as just tools in his quest. He does not really care about them. And also Mulder and Modell see themselves as these heroes in this grand quest when they're actually not. As far as like, he always felt like such a little man. He wanted to do something big. It really shows how self-aware Vince Gilligan's writing is, as opposed to someone like Chris Carter. I don't think he would have the self-awareness to point that out in Mulder, because Mulder was his self-insert OC in the X-Files. It shows just how amazing of a writer Vince Gilligan is. And I really appreciate that. I think in the fandom, people tend to like put Mulder on this pedestal, like he's a perfect angel that will do no wrong, when he's actually a very toxic and problematic person. And I really appreciate that one of the X-Files writers like pointed that out. Next we have MSR. Now, if you know me, I don't like MSR canonically in the series. MSR fanfic, some of the best fanfic out there, and I love MSR fanfic. That's why I write fanfic, because I love them. I love their relationship in fanfic. I don't care for it in the series. This episode is one of the rare exceptions. Mulder's a sweetheart in this. uh, the it really goes to show like how different would this show have been if someone like Vince Gilligan had been the showrunner, um, writing these characters with the skill and compassion I think they deserved, instead of like getting someone like Chris Carter who just absolutely destroyed his show. There's some really cute MSR moments. These are just the ones off the top of my head. They hold hands a lot in this episode. I always squeal like an 8th grader. I'm like, oh my God, they're holding hands. The scene before Mulder goes to confront Modell in the hospital, he turns his camera on Scully and they hold hands, and it's a very sweet moment. He also like bends down to get on her level. Mulder in this episode is a lot like the Mulder in the pilot episode, or an episode like Squeeze. You're like, why can't we have this man? Like, why did we get the problematic piece of horse shit we got? And instead of this sweetheart of a guy. And then at the end where Scully's like, hey, fuck Modell, actually. And her and Mulder hold hands. She's like, let's not waste another minute of our time on him. And I'll talk more about that. That's a very sweet MSR moment. There's some funny ones. They're on a stakeout. Scully falls asleep, and Mulder, who could have just like nudged her shoulder or something, gently caresses her face. And it's very much the interactions between two lovers. They are no longer platonic coworkers at this point, at least in my mind. Also, Modell refers to Scully as Mulder's, quote, pretty partner. Guys, even the psychopath's shipping you. You guys need to get together. Love episodes where like even the psychopath is shipping these two. There's also a funny moment where Mulder's like doing target practice, aka expending his impotent fury at Modell. Mulder does that a lot in the series. When he gets mad, he'll just like go, let me fire some guns. Men, right? But the Scully comes in there, and they're very much giving this energy of like newlyweds having their first fight. I'd love to be a federal agent and just like walk in there to get some target practice done, and you see the two hot as hell weirdos from the X-Files office just having a domestic argument. I really love that moment. Also, it has one of my favorite lines from Scully, and Mulder says like, Modell put the whammy on the judge in the courtroom, which we'll talk about in a minute. And Scully's like, please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy. And I have this Twitter rewatch thread, and I'm like, that will be the epitaph on my tombstone. Please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy. I also want to get it tattooed on my arm. It's like my favorite Scully quote. It's maybe my second favorite Scully quote. She has a quote in the pilot that I want to get tattooed on my body. Okay, so next we have Holly. Another great thing about this episode is the side characters, and I can't talk about them all. But Holly is the one that definitely stands out. Holly is this person who works in the records division at the Bureau. She's not a federal agent, but she's like a layperson working there. She's hot as hell, raven hair, brown eyes, and she's having a fucking week in this episode. She gets mugged in Georgetown. Great way to start your week off, I'm sure. And then this creepy psychopath like breaks into the FBI building and like manipulates her into beating up her boss. So Holly's having a fucking day. Also, there's a bond between Scully and Holly that I really love, and in a show that says female friendship, we don't know them. It's a very refreshing thing to see. After Holly beats up Skinner, don't worry, we're gonna get there. My favorite part in the episode. Scully reaches out and like very gently squeezes Holly's knee, and it's for Scully, who is someone who like has a hard time creating these emotional bonds with people. Like, you get this interesting vibe from them. I really think they were lovers and they dated at some point. But Holly, love her. Poor kid, though. And then she comes back in Redux and helps Scully out when Scully's sus of Skinner. And I'm like, yeah, there's something going on between those two foxes, and it is very hot. Next, we have Skinner. So I put this in the middle of the list. This would have been at the top if not for the parts about Scully and Modell. But Mr. Skinner is my favorite part in this episode. There's these Monster of the Week episodes in the X-Files where it's like it doesn't have anything to do with the myth art, but Mr. Skinner's just there and he's like, hey, here I am. I'm dad and I'm doing my shit. And that's what he is in the episode Pusher. Like, it just kind of gives you this window into Walter Skinner's day-to-day life and how troubling it is. So it's like he got up that morning, he had his coffee, he walked to work, he got the shit beaten out of him by one of his employees. So Modell, light spoilers in this video. Again, if you have not watched Pusher, stop this video and please watch it. There are some spoilers here. Modell breaks into the FBI building and he manipulates Holly with his crazy mind powers into beating the shit out of Skinner. Making her believe that he's the guy who mugged her. This entire scene with Skinner is just art. So he's like walking past the records division office. He sees Holly, who, if you know Mr. Skinner, the moment he sees a young woman, he's immediately going to adopt them as his daughter. What is the meme? And it's like, it's free real estate. Well, Skinner sees a young woman and he's like, it's free daughter. And I stole that meme from Tumblr. They were saying that about Wolverine on X-Men. Also extremely true about Wolverine. He is everyone's dad. Mr. Skinner's that way. He's everyone's dad. He sees Holly getting hassled and he's like, hold up. He's like, is there a baby that needs protecting? And he slides in the office. Modell's shit doesn't work on Skinner, which is retconned in the sequel episode Kitsunagari, which I think sucks. We'll talk a little bit about Modell's powers later on in the list. But anyway, it doesn't work on Skinner. He's like, that's bullshit. Stop harassing my child. And he steps forward to confront him. And Modell calls him Mel Cooley, which is a great nod to the Dick Van Dyke Show. Vince Gilligan was also a big fan of the Dick Van Dyke Show. And he's always throwing in these little nods to the Dick Van Dyke Show. But then Holly sprays Skinner with mace and then kicks the shit out of him. This 102-pound woman. And Skinner just doesn't even try to defend himself. He's like, nope, I'm not beating up my daughter. Forget it. He's like, I'll just lay here and take the blows. Love Skinner. Love that guy. Also, the scene cuts from Holly kicking the shit out of him and Skinner is very specific in that she's like, she wears a size 7 heel. He's like, I have a size 7 heel mark on my face. And I just love that. Mitch Pileggi's acting is so good in that scene. Always cracks me up. But it cuts from her kicking the shit out of him to her just crying and be like, oh my God, Mr. Skinner, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. And I'm like, oh baby, that's not your fault. Anyway, love Holly, love Skinner. Love it when they're on the show. So let's move on to some of the trope throwbacks, as I mentioned earlier in the video. This episode kind of nods at a lot of the X-Files tropes. And one of them, it's a very small thing, but I love it so much I have to discuss it, is when Mulder is in a courtroom setting. This happens in Tombs, and it happens at other points in the series, which I can't think of right now, but I remember it happening in Tombs. The defendant, in this case Modell, is on the ropes, and Mulder steps into the courtroom and gets the defendant off because he just sounds so batshit insane. And all the while Scully's in the back just like doing the Jean-Luc Picard. She's like, oh my God, really? So, like, it's a very good nod to that X-Files trope, which I always enjoy. Also in Tombs, Mulder says to Scully when she's like, what the shit, Mulder? Like, how are you going? You can't convince the judge with this explanation of the paranormal. And Mulder tells Scully, he's like, I don't care how it sounds as long as it's the truth. And it, again, very much brings it back to, like, Mulder just doesn't care about people. Like, he's not going to care if these people kill again as long as he's right. And it's, like, a very problematic facet of his character, like how he does not view people as people. These are my opinions. It's a great trope, always makes me giggle, especially when it like cuts to Scully just like this. And later on, Mulder's like, Modell put the whammy on the judge, like using his mind powers. And I'm like, no, Mulder, I think you did more damage than Modell could have ever done to the judge. Okay, bro. Like, he didn't even have to do anything. I listened to this podcast. It's called Fox Mulder is a Maniac, and it's wonderful. And they were talking about the same trope in the episode Tombs. And they say, how much do you want to bet that the defense used Mulder's testimony to get Tombs off? So, and that's the same thing that happens in Pusher. Okay, so let's move on to the man, the legend, the horrifying guy, Robert Patrick Modell. So he's the villain in this episode. I'm going to say, Robert Patrick Modell is not just the greatest X-Files villain. He's one of my favorite villains of all time. Like, he's up there with, like, Anton Chigurh on No Country for Old Men. Now, the X-Files is really out there saying, like, there's nothing more terrifying than an evil man with a little power. Like, there's no monster or beastie or ghosty that's ever gonna top just how evil that can be. But the thing I think that sets Modell apart from someone like Faster or Schnauz or Chaco, who are all just terrifying in their own right, is that Modell's motive or lack thereof. Like, I think with those other killers, like, they had this very personal motive, specific motive, and with Modell, he just wants to kill and maim people in these horrifying ways just to get attention, just to get the recognition he believes he deserves. Again, they say, like, he was always such a little man. He wanted to be known for something big. And I don't know if this was done intentionally. I don't think it was, because the X-Files writers were, on the whole, white men. So I really don't think that this would have been done intentionally or, like, with any kind of discussion. But the X-Files was kind of ahead of its time, intentionally or not, like, exploring incel culture. And this was before, like, the term incel culture was part of our cultural vocabulary. Just kind of putting a spotlight on men who feel society has not given them the recognition or attention they deserve, and they're just going to take it out on everyone, usually women. And Modell is very much a really great example of that, and he's just fucking evil. Like, he'll go from just brutally murdering or just horrifically, ooh, I have a foot cramp, excuse me, or just horrifically maiming people to just messing with them. The scene where he goes to teetotalers golf range, there's these Japanese golfers there, and he's just fucking with them. And he does that with Holly when he's talking to her. He's like, hey, I'd love a printout of this information, because he's stalking Mulder. And he's like, oh, and a cup of coffee when you get the chance. Like, he's doing this just because he enjoys this cruel power over people. As far as Modell's powers go, they're kind of plot convenient. like I said, in Kitsunagari, it, like, suddenly doesn't work on Skinner. It suddenly works on Skinner, when in Pusher it didn't. One theory is that if Modell is very focused on one target, in this case Holly, he can't put the whammy on someone like Skinner. But that makes no sense, because he walks through the halls of the FBI building and, like, everyone just sees, they don't remember seeing him because he has past written on his lapel. So, you know, plot convenient villains. It's one of the things the X-Files does best, right? The Deus Ex Machina. But that being said, Modell's terrifying. Like, he almost makes Mulder kill Scully, the woman he loves more than his next breath. And he's just gonna let Mulder live with that for the rest of his life. Like, that, I think, is the most terrifying thing a villain has done on the X-Files. And it's it's really cool that they have a villain like Modell. He needs no like CGI animation or practical effects. He's just this dude, and having that cruel power over someone, I think just like sets him apart from other villains, and it makes him a really good one in my top 10 favorite villains. Okay, and the next is Scully in the third act. It's one of the reasons I love this episode. She's going into the hospital where Robert Patrick Modell has cornered Mulder, and she's gonna get her man. It's great. I love this scene. She's wearing this like seafoam suit. She's this tiny woman in like this body swallowing bulletproof vest, and all of these SWAT team guys are like at her heels, cowering back, like watching this tiny woman walk down the halls of this hospital to confront Modell. Again, this scene gives some really good liminal spaces. The scene where Scully's walking through the corridors of the hospital. Again, a feeling of like comforting nostalgia and terrible impending doom and dread. You can come up here. My boy Thunder wants to talk to me. So there's also some other really good moments with Scully in the final act. She's great through the whole episode, but just in the final act, it's like Scully in the final act of Pusher is in my top 5 badass Scully moments. Just the way she's gonna go save her Princess Mulder. While he's going through the corridor with his like eyes and ears technology, it's hilarious to watch Mulder like walk into the hospital, and he's like, please go about your business, and everybody's like, what the fuck is this? Again, it makes me giggle. Scully is talking to him through his ear device, whatever it's called, his intercom. And she's like, Mulder, I'm here. And it's like, it really reminds me of the scene in Dwayne Barry where he's like in a hostage negotiation with Dwayne Barry. And she's like, Mulder, it's me. And she's talking into his ear. And she's just, it shows how she's always there for him, how she's always like guiding him and grounding him. And it's just, it's a really hot, sexy moment when she's talking to him over that earpiece device. And then, like, when Modell captures Mulder, she just rushes in there. She's like, fuck all y'all. My princess is in danger. Must save him. So, and I think the scene from Pusher most people remember is the last scene where they're having the most terrifying game of Russian roulette, I think, in media history. Modell he has Mulder under this mind control, and he's like, he wants him to shoot Scully. It's a really terrifying and just uncomfortable moment. The first time my daughter watched this, she was about 6, and she'd watched episodes like The Host and Home, and she's like, no, Mom, that stuff doesn't bother me. She's kind of a kid who's like into horror, and I support her. But this scene made her cry, and I think it's just the intensity of it. Like, Modell really wants Mulder to murder Scully and live with that for the rest of his life, and he almost does. And Mulder has to live with that, and that's just really terrifying. It's some first-rate psychological horror. Scully starts crying. She's like, Mulder, you're stronger than this. And Jillian, of course, has that one little sexy single tear. I put out on Twitter, I said, the real X-File in Pusher is, how can a human being be this beautiful? It just showed her with that one little tear. And Mulder almost shoots her. Like, you see the bullet in the gun, like, and it's turning. He's about to shoot her, and he's like, Scully, run. And she goes to run, and he's like, Scully, run. You just see him mouthing it, and she hits the fire alarm, and he turns and shoots Modell. And he just keeps pulling the trigger after the bullets are out. And it's little touches like that Vince Gilligan throws in that's just so good. It really shows just what a skilled writer he is. And those are my top 10 favorite moments from Pusher. What are your top 10 favorite moments from Pusher, or your favorite moments from this just golden 49 minutes of television? Whenever I watch Pusher, I'm reminded why I love watching the X-Files. I'm reminded why I love writing fan fiction, why I go to X-Files cons. I'm reminded why I'm obsessed with this show. And it's episodes like this. It's just like, yeah, you got to put up with a lot of shit watching the X-Files because it's problematic as fuck and it hasn't aged well. But then you get moments like this, and like, it's really good. If you have never watched the X-Files and you want to get into it, start with Pusher. And if you like Pusher, I think you'll like the show. And if you don't, well, find something else to watch. Go watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's the show I want to rewatch. So it's been fun, guys. I hope y'all have a happy new year. And I will be seeing y'all later. Follow me on Twitter. I am at raccoons_dead. I am at Tumblr at justawfulxmenart. I'm at DeviantArt at dead-raccoons. And of course, I'm here on YouTube. Tell me about Pusher. What do you think of it? In the new year, what X-Files episodes do you want me to talk about? Because I love talking about X-Files. I'll see y'all later. I love you. Mwah.